I'm Aiden, and
I'm Jack.
Nice to meet you. I'm Ryan Smithson, Iraq War vet.
awesome. All right. So what was your rank?
I was a specialist, so it's above private and below sergeant.
Awesome. In which branch of the military did you serve in?
Army, reserves.
All right. Give Jack a second to write that down. Do you want to say next one?
Sure.
All right.
So, how long did you serve?
So my reserve contract was 8 years total. For 6 of those years, you have to do the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks per year. And then the last 2, you don't have to do anything, but you're still on the list and they can call you if they need you. So I consider it really 6 years when I was actually doing stuff. And then I was deployed for 1 year to Iraq, and that was full time, obviously.
So what did you do in Iraq?
I was an engineer, so I was doing construction. We were, my MOS, my military occupational specialty, I think that's what it stands for. Basically my job was heavy equipment operator, so dump trucks, bulldozers, scoop loaders, graders, and scrapers. So those were the 5 pieces of equipment that I was trained on. And then when we were in Iraq, we had, in my platoon, we had like a concrete squad, we had a truck driver squad. So we had other equipment that we would use that I wasn't technically what I was supposed to do, but you use whatever resources you got. So we, on any given day, it was different all the time. So we'd get a mission down, and sometimes we were repairing a road. So there's some road that's all blown up, and we got to go out there and either fill holes with concrete, or we got to like scrape up the entire road and like lay a new concrete pad. Sometimes we were repairing, we were building up fortifications. That was the other thing we did a lot. So whenever the Army goes somewhere, they have to set up camp, right? So that's what engineers are really for. And at the perimeter of a camp, you have to have fortifications. And so we had what were called HESCO barriers, and they're basically giant sandbags. They're probably 4x4, and they're just in a big line, and you just have to dump dirt into them. And it takes a long time. There's a lot of sand to move around. So we'd have like a borrow pit where we were taking the sand from, and we'd dump it into these things. So it was hot, dusty, gross work. And like you'd picture a construction site. That's essentially what I did, but in the Army.
Nice.
Yep.
All right, Jack. Yeah.
So, did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted, so there's no current draft. The last draft was in Vietnam. So since then, it's been an all-volunteer force, and so I enlisted. Yep.
So, what kind of foods did you eat?
Depending on where we were, I was kind of stationed in central Iraq, like just north of Baghdad. But then we had all these other companies that we were supporting, so we were always bringing them supplies or just doing missions wherever. So mostly northern and western Iraq. So depending on what base you were at, some had like full chow halls, and it was good food. I mean, as good as any other like Army chow that you'd get. Once in a while, they'd even bring in lobster from the Mediterranean. So like we got lobster sometimes. So that when it was like that, it was great. Depending on where you were, it might be, you might only have MREs, which is the packaged food, which is terrible. And I think they've gotten a little better since then. But certain ones were fine, like beef stew was okay, because it's just stew. But there were ones that were just disgusting. Like they had a burger one. It was awful. It was like compressed wet dog food. And you have 2 pieces of this bread, and it's like really fiber-rich bread, because it's meant to like fill you up and sustain you. And so it's like this really thick, like just gross bread, and that was the worst one. But they also, they would have like Skittles and stuff in them too. So they put some stuff in there that's good. Some of them came with like a milkshake, so it was just powdered, and then you just add water. It makes a milkshake. So that wasn't terrible, but when you have to eat those for like 2 weeks or something, it sucks. And then other times there would be some bases where they didn't have their own chow hall, but they were close enough to a larger base. So every day they would go in at like breakfast breakfast only was like they'd go get a thing of eggs from the chow hall and a thing of, potatoes or something, and they bring it out. And so that was at least hot, like good food. And then the rest of the day you ate the MREs, but at least you didn't have to eat them all the time. So it really depended on where we were. Sometimes we were literally sleeping in the middle of the desert, in the back of a Humvee, or in a tent or something. And when it was like that, you just have MREs. So it's
Cool.
yeah. Have you ever tried an MRE? Have you ever seen them? Or
yeah.
Eaten a lot of them.
Oh yeah, for like camping and stuff. Or yeah. Which ones have you had? Which ones do you like?
I think it's like vegetable beef and I think it's just like beef and carrots.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds similar to like the beef stew.
Yeah, I think I had beef stew.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That was all right. What one don't you like?
There was this one that we ate when we were going to ride, and I forget what it was, but it tasted really bad.
Yeah, some are really awful.
I had a patty. It was like maple brown sugar meat or whatever. It was just a patty and it was gross.
Yeah, that's kind of like the hamburger one. I don't know what that one is. That must be like a breakfast one or something. They had some breakfast ones, and they were disgusting. They had like eggs, and it was like a same thing, like a patty of eggs, and it was like just gross. But it's food.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's all you get.
Cool. How were you feeling when you were deployed?
Well, I guess it depends on where I was and what I was doing. It's a lot of different, as far as emotions and stuff. There's a ton of different, right? So there's obviously fear, but that's not all the time. You're not sitting there just like afraid all the time. And there's, you're missing your family, right? And but there's also times when you're just bored. Sometimes there's not a lot to do, and you're just kind of waiting around for another mission, or you've completed one and you're kind of wrapping things up, and you have some downtime. And so sometimes it's really boring being in the Army. There's other times when we would have a lot of fun. Like we'd throw on boxing gloves and hit each other, and we'd play football and stuff. We made our own using camo netting. We made a little volleyball court behind our barracks, so we'd play volleyball, and so it's a lot of different emotions. During a firefight or anything like that, it was you don't feel a whole lot. It might sound weird, but you're sort of your training kind of kicks in, and you just do what you do. And that's the reason soldiers train and drill over and over again. Just like if you play a sport. Do you guys play sports?
Yeah.
Yep.
So what do you play?
Soccer and lacrosse.
I play soccer and basketball.
Okay. So like in basketball, you have to throw the ball at the hoop so many times, say practicing layups or something. You have to do it so many times so it's like automatic. Same kind of thing with a military mission. You're doing this stuff over and over again, and most of the time we were fine. It was safe. We're just doing construction, so sometimes you're just tired and hungry and hot, and then something would explode or that something would happen, and you sort of just react. And it's kind of amazing how natural it sort of seems, at least in my experience, that your training just sort of kicks in and you do what you have to do. And then it's, whenever something bad like that would happen, that's when, sort of like later on at night, is when the feelings start to come into play and you start to really think about all this stuff. And then especially when you come home, some of that stuff comes out on its own because you were bottling it up for a year, and now it sort of comes out. So that's those are the tougher things. But sorry, that's a long answer.
No, that's all right.
Big question.
So I'll go on from that. Why did you enlist?
I joined after 9/11, so I was 16 years old. And when 9/11 happened, you can't join the Army when you're 16, but when 9/11 happened, I was 16, and it was really a pretty shocking experience for the whole country and for me personally. And I didn't know anyone who died on that day or anything like that, but there was a real sense of I needed to do something. And I was not was not a kid who always wanted to be a soldier or anything like that. My family was not, every single person serves or anything like that. So I probably wouldn't have joined if it wasn't for 9/11. And I just felt like I wanted to do something. But I wanted to kind of maybe learn a skill that I could use on the outside. So instead of just going into the infantry, I wanted to do something different, serve, but also see what else the military had to offer. So that's why I chose the engineers. There was a long list of stuff I could choose from, and sounded interesting. So that's what I went with.
Awesome. All right. Let's check. Let's start at the top.
So what was your favorite memory or your favorite activity or moment?
Good question. So there's a lot of really good memories, and even basic training. So you see there's a stereotypical sort of basic training image of drill sergeant screaming in your face, and all that stuff happens. But there's also you do a lot of fun stuff in basic training and in the Army in general. So you have the confidence courses, and you rappel down walls, and I always liked that stuff. I was never afraid of any of that. So things like that I really enjoyed. And then the people that you're there with, you really get to know them, and you're sort of going through some tough things together, so it bonds you. My favorite memory from Iraq, there was a kid, and I write about this in my book. There was a kid an Iraqi boy, this little group of farmland kids came up to us, and I don't remember what we were doing. We were either stopped on a convoy or we were doing a road repairing mission, but whatever we were doing, we were just out in the general population. And there were these kids that came up, and we were giving them water and food and stuff. And this one kid came up, and he had this little rabbit's foot. I think it's rabbit's foot anyway. It looks like a rabbit's foot, but it's about that big, and it's fluffy and hairy, but it's got these two little beads on it for eyes and stitching for the nose and whatever. And I couldn't tell if it was a cat or if it was an owl. And he just kept saying bazuna, 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 bazuna. And I'm like, wait, is it a cat? Or is it an owl? And he's like, bazuna, bazuna. And I said hoo, hoo, like an owl. And he said, meow, meow, bazuna. And I said, so then I found out okay, he means cat. So I taught him how to say cat, and bazuna is in that part of the country anyway, in Iraq, that's cat in Arabic. So it was kind of a cool little exchange. I gave him Gatorade, and he gave me the little bazuna cat. And that was a special memory for me, because I felt like that's why I was there. Even I was doing, we were doing work for the military. There are civil affairs units that is their job to go build hospitals and schools and hand out soccer balls and candy and things like that. But whenever we were out and we were in contact with the Iraqi people, it was those little moments that you hang on to, because while there is some bad stuff that happens that you have to deal with, there's also a lot of good that was happening. And those kids are the future of the country. That kid now is voting age. He's probably 20 years old. So hopefully it meant as much to him as it did to me. I don't know.
Awesome. What did you do in your free time?
So I talked a little bit about that already. We played sports. We'd watch movies. A lot of us had laptops and stuff, and we had a generator outside our barracks, so we had electricity most of the time, depending on where we were. The other thing that I did that is kind of different. A couple of the guys brought guitars, and they knew how to play guitar, and they brought them with them. And I had always wanted to learn, but I had never done it. And so they showed me some chords, and I figured it out. And we would just sit around and jam. And my wife Heather bought me a guitar and shipped it overseas, and so we would hang out and play songs. And that was real cool. That was just to kind of get away from everything. And I also read a lot. I would read almost every night, which I still do. So, nothing too crazy. Same stuff kids do back here in free time.
Awesome. All right, Jack.
What were you most proud of when you served for your country?
Probably just the fact that we were trying to help the people in Iraq, And overall, that mission I don't think went quite as planned, and we're still there, and it's still a challenge. But from my experiences and the people that I talked to who live there, they were just looking for something better, and they wanted a better form of government, a government that actually cared about them. And so to be able to try to bring what we have here and what I took for granted for a long time to people in other parts of the world was really special.
Awesome.
Okay.
What was it like when you returned from serving?
It was a struggle for a while. I came home and you get unemployment time for a while. And I don't know what the cutoff is, but I used about 3 months of it. And I was just like bored. So I enrolled in college, but it wasn't going to start until the springtime. And so I was like kind of just sitting around. My wife came home and I was married. So my wife was working and I'm just sitting there like in the middle of the day, like bored and wondering like, I can't believe that's over. While you're there and you're over in a combat zone, it seems like it's never going to end. And then it does, and you're back home and you're like, okay, what now? And there's so much purpose when you're overseas, and then you come home and you have to kind of figure out what your purpose is again, and that can be difficult. I was never diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but I definitely had some symptoms of it. So I was having night terrors when I first came home, and I would wake up totally terrified. I wasn't having a nightmare. It wasn't anything specific that I was reacting to, but I would just wake up, like a cold sweat. My heart is like beating and totally scared, like somebody was going to come kill me. I lived in West Sand Lake at the time, which is way out in the country. Like there's nobody. Didn't live in a dangerous city or anything. And that would happen, and it wasn't every night, but it would be like every few days that would happen, and eventually I could like get myself to go back to sleep. But the first few times it happened, it was terrifying, and I was ashamed of it, I felt like I was weak, that this was happening to me. But in hindsight, what was going on is I had all those emotions and things that I was stuffing down because I had to for that year, because I had to focus on the mission and not let myself get too distracted by any of that. And I realized that just because I was ignoring them doesn't mean they weren't there. So they would just kind of come up on their own. And that's what was happening. So I was having the night terrors. I had some hyper awareness, just sort of like always on edge, always on guard, especially driving. But that stuff gets better with time, and I did end up going to therapy at the VA. My wife and I went to marriage counseling, and I sat down with the therapist a couple of times, just him and I, just so we could talk through some of the war stuff. And then we came in, and we were having a hard time. And it was, when I first came home, it was great. We were back together again. It was like awesome. But then after so many months, again, you're trying to put those pieces back together, and we were just really different people. And so the therapy helped, and that's what I tell veterans when I talk in groups and stuff about my book, is that if you need help, go get it. It's out there. You're not weak. If you need help, it's totally normal. And then the other big thing for me, about a year after I got home, I started writing about my experiences, and that was a big part of my healing, because I was able to process some of these things and even write about the good stuff, like the Bazuna Cat. Right, I wrote about those stories, and it made me realize that there was a lot of good that I could take out of this experience. So it's, it had its ups and downs, and you kind of get help when you need it, and you move on. I went to college, I went out into the working world, and you just got to keep your wheels spinning.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right, Jack.
So I have a question that I don't think is on there, but what was your job when you got back?
Oh, good question. I was a I worked at a before and after school program, and it was perfect for college because I would go to work in the morning, and I like 7 to 9, and then I would go to college and go to my classes, and then I'd work in the evening. That was the job that I had the most while I was in college, but I also did landscaping. I worked at a paper mill, so I had some kind of more like factory type jobs, like labor jobs, and then I did got into the before and after school program, and then their summer camp they had in the summer, so that was a little easier to manage than the other jobs as far as going to college. It was perfect for that. After that, and I was going to college, and after I got my degree, I went into more into like the business world, and then for a while after I was at the before and after school program, and started working full time. I worked for the American Red Cross, so we went and did blood drives all over the place, so schools and churches and hospitals and wherever. So we would go and do that. I did that for a long time. That was like almost 4 years I worked there. And I worked at a fuel company. So I've had a lot of different jobs. And now, as you know, I work at Tyler. So we make bus routing software for schools.
Awesome. Let's see. What would you change during your service? So if you could go back, would you change anything, and what would it be?
It's hard to say. Sometimes I wish I had done something that had a little more relevance on the outside that I could have done. I mean, I could have got more into construction when I got home, but the economy wasn't really great for it. And a lot of those jobs are seasonal, so they're kind of tough to do full time. But, you know, if I went in for something like a medic or something like that really has like a lot of use on the outside. But that being said, I don't think I could change anything. I mean, I am who I am because of what I did and what I went through. And I have this story to tell, and I've been able to write it down, and I was fortunate enough that it actually got turned into a book. And, you know, I don't think I could, you go back and change something, you know, who knows what the consequences of that would be. So, you know, I've done well with what I did. So overall, I don't think I would go back and change anything.
Awesome. You can ask one, Jack.
What kind of medals did you receive?
I had the biggest medal, I guess, most like important medal, is an Army Commendation Medal, which I got at the end of the tour for completing, I think it was like over 70 missions while we were in theater. And I got a good conduct medal, which basically means you don't get in trouble. And then there's a bunch of other things that you get for serving in particular areas. So there's like the Global War on Terror medal I have, which I didn't do anything special for. It's just because I was there for that. And then the Operation Iraqi Freedom has a medal itself. There's probably a couple more that I'm forgetting, but those are the big ones.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay.
You want to ask the question you really wanted to ask at home?
Which was that?
About the tank?
Oh yeah, did you ever drive a tank?
Nope. I drove a lot of stuff. Pretty much anything the Army makes with wheels, I've driven. But tracks, not so much, except for bulldozers and excavators.
So did you get to drive side-by-sides?
The
Like the
side-by-side.
four-wheeler sort of thing?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
So it's kind of like a four-wheeler, except for you can put like 2 people in the front, 2 people in the back, and like Yamaha and Polaris makes them.
No, I don't know that the Army has a whole lot of that. Although I did license myself on an Army motorcycle. Never drove it, but we went through when we were getting deployed. You have a military license, just like a driver's license, and it's just a sheet of paper that says that you're licensed to drive these vehicles. So initially, when I graduated from my job training, I had those 5 vehicles that I talked about earlier, and those are on there. And then, but the unit had other equipment that I might need to drive, so like the Humvees, obviously, and the tractor trailers and things like that. And so we went through and just licensed ourselves on them. And there was a computer in a tent, and you just had to go up and they had a list, like find these vehicles and put them on your license. And just to get it done, everybody just did their own. So I'm looking through this list of all these vehicles, and I saw a motorcycle. I'm like, oh, cool, boom. And so I added that to my. So I never drove one, but no, I don't know what they have as far as that goes. They probably have something, but I don't know.
Cool.
Cool.
Anything else you want to ask, Jack?
No.
All right. Well, thank you for your time and thank you for your service.
You're welcome, mate.
Yes,
Thanks a lot, man.
thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Jack.
Yep.
Nice work.
Thanks.
Yeah.